Welcome to Next Level Coaching with Erin Cotman. I am excited for this episode because I have my very first coach, Dr. Kelly Gunn, as our guest today. We're going to talk about coaching, feedback, like the building coaching leaders and what that looks like because it is a different muscle. But before we start, can you introduce yourself and tell us like a little bit about your kind of like education background story thing?
Yeah. I always wanted to be a teacher. I always wanted to be in education. My mom tells this story though that made me realize, well, maybe I always wanted to be some type of coach.
Oh,
So she says that I was about in first grade, and I would come home and I'd say, the teacher's lesson today was about so and so and so, but it would have been better if she had done. Or she said, I would say more kids would have learned if she had done. And so she's laughs now. She says, this is so natural
yeah.
because even as a kid, you would critique these lessons and you had ideas as to how to make it better. So I think that's super funny now coming into this space, doing
Yes.
the work that I do. And I started off as a teacher in Texas. I taught seventh and eighth grade ELA, which is why I was so interested in what you taught
Mm-hmm.
when we met. And I remember just wanting to do more with how people were taught to teach and learn. And so when I left Dallas, I left Texas, I went back to school specifically to do curriculum and instruction,
Mm-hmm.
also to do some work in educational leadership. And I ended up keep going. I like school, got my doctorate.
I went to school again.
I went to school again. Um, and so yes, master's, doctorate, ed specialist, all that stuff. At the time, the University of Cincinnati had the only urban educational leadership doctorate. And so I was very interested in that work. Got to dip my toe in some college teaching.
Yep.
So that was fun. And fast forward, we moved to Atlanta. And I don't know if you know this, I really wanted to work for Atlanta Public Schools.
Oh.
But at the time it was a cheating scandal and they weren't hiring
Oh
anybody.
yeah, no. Everybody sit down.
They weren't hiring anybody. And so I heard about a new role at a charter network and ended up going into that space. And this is my first time going into a charter school. Being from Louisiana, family of educators, I remember my grandmother saying, like, charter schools are the devil.
Yeah, it's bad. They're ruining everything. Yeah, yeah,
Everything.
yeah,
So it
yeah.
was like this kind of like juxtaposition of I am a public school teacher and let me go into this space. But I feel like that was a really life-changing experience for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, one of the things that I learned specifically, I'll give Kip that shout out. I feel like Kip was where like smart business met education.
Mm.
Prior to that, people were just doing a lot of stuff that didn't make sense.
Yeah.
And Kip at the time, specifically Kip in Atlanta, I felt like our executive director was really making a lot of smart business moves and helping us to be an organization that was organizationally healthy
It's sustainable.
and
Mm-hmm.
sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first time I had seen or experienced that. But I also got to learn to be a coach in that space. And so I met you and so many other great people.
So I want to talk about the role you had as like it was a residency director, right? It was a
Yes.
director role?
Yes.
And so that's how I met Kelly. We could have, so she ran like this like pipeline of creating, right?
Mhm.
Kip's own teachers for Kip Atlanta.
Yeah, it was basically, hey, we got this grow your own grant. Let's grow your own. And came into this space and I was told, okay, you got to build this program from scratch. You need to find the mentor teachers, you need to find the residents and go forth and be great.
Yes. So I became a mentor teacher. That was my first time ever. I had no idea what coaching was. Like I had coaches, but I had never, that was my first, when people say to me all the time, like, how'd you start coaching? I'm like, that was my first experience with coaching was through your programming. And I was just really blessed because Kelly, for whatever reason, took some sort of liking to me. And she was like, hey, you're gonna be mentor teacher, and I'm gonna pour into you and figure out how to make you
So I
a
don't
good
know if you
coach.
know this. Let me tell you this part.
Oh boy.
I randomly, well, not randomly, let me not say that. I looked at everybody's data in the network. And when I was looking at the data, I'm like, well, who is this? And actually, I don't know if you know this, but the feedback was like, well, she's a
Mhm.
relatively young teacher. I don't
Mhm.
know if she'll be ready. And I was like, let me go see. And I remember like observing the classrooms. And one, I just remember the relationships that you had with kids and just the command of the room, right?
That's nice way to put it. You can say what you really said. She used to be like, "You was mean."
Well, she was light and demanding, not so much warm yet.
I was a young teacher still.
She was a young teacher. And I also think there was this myth that because I remember as a young teacher, I started teaching straight out of college, 22, people saying things like, don't smile on Christmas.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it was this idea that you couldn't naturally be who you were and build relationships. And that was such a dumb old school myth.
Yeah, it makes you feel like you have to. And I also think, right, like as a young teacher, you come into spaces where you kind of like soak up what's around you. And, at that time, and obviously the school has evolved a ton. It was very like strict. And
It was you were supposed to, you were supposed to, it was no excuses. It was supposed to be
for you or the kids.
Yes, it was a no excuses charter. And so we were coming into that space. And I remember thinking like, well, it doesn't have to be this way. And what if I have a program with a group of teachers where we maybe try to do something a little different?
Yeah. And it was such a cool program because that's when I learned. So essentially I had like a student teacher all year. And what I loved about the program too is you let us even come in from like the interview process. So we got to be a part of who would even be a part of the program, right? And then
basically you're about to be married to this person. Remember that?
For a long time, right? But you not only did you get to be in that part of the process, but then you supported us with ongoing coaching as mentor teachers throughout the year. So that was the first time that I almost got to see like levels of coaching of like you're coaching us, you were also coaching the mentors, but we were also having parts of coaching them and developing them as well. And so like that was just like a super interesting experience in itself for me.
And you're reminding me now as I'm listening to that, I remember that wasn't even a part of the program. So it was supposed to be, hey, get these residents ready. And I was like, well, a missing piece is to teach the mentor teacher to be a coach. And so I remember having to say, well, I need two different curricula basically, because this person needs development too. But the original grant only focused on the resident. And you just reminded me of that.
Yeah. But like you had the foresight to see that would have been a major gap.
Yeah.
That would have been a huge gap, right? To just, because I think that's part of the problem sometimes with like traditional student teaching is you like put a teacher in a classroom.
You know how to teach them.
Yeah. And then we put them with somebody random who may or may not really have an interest in development. And then now you're like doing like the grade book. Like because the person's room you're in isn't actually really invested in the idea of what does it take to be a strong teacher sometimes.
Nobody's invested in them to build that muscle.
Yeah.
Right? That's a different type of muscle. Just because I know how to do this doesn't mean I know how to show somebody else how to do this.
Yep. And or see the connection to why that's important sometimes, right? Okay. So what do you do now?
Yeah. So fast forward from that. That was a 3-year grant.
Oh, yeah, I skipped a whole other part of your life. She's done a lot. That's why she's here.
Fast forward from that. Remember I said I really wanted to work with Atlanta Public Schools, right? I felt like, hey, this is Atlanta. This is the, APS. This is where kids really need me. I work with some really great people at KIPP. KIPP may not need me as much as Atlanta. I don't know, maybe that's not a humble thing to say, but that was like my thought process of like, hey, I'd like to take a lot of what I've learned from KIPP to Atlanta Public Schools. So I worked under a grant and my grant was coming to an end and I got a job in Atlanta Public Schools. So I was hired as a dean of academics at a school, and the same day I forgot about this. Right, this is a funny story. Yeah. The same day I was hired, my job was abolished.
Imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, because you did. Yeah, you can imagine actually.
Like, okay, God, why would you do this? Like
that's very forceful, Lord.
Yeah. And it was so in Atlanta Public Schools, when you have a new position, they have school board members who vote on your job. And it's in the meeting notes. It says Kelly Gunn, Dean of Academics, ratified. You keep reading down, it says Kelly Gunn, Dean of Academics, abolished in the same meeting notes. And I was like, wow. And so I'm basically hired
and fired.
In the same.
When you're ever in like a funny tidbit, like at icebreakers, they're like, what's something that needs to be yours? Have you ever been fired on the same day? That needs to be yours.
So I get hired and I'm only going to be there for 3 months.
I remember all of this now. Yeah.
It's I'm in this funky space of like spiritually, like, okay, God, like, why would you let me leave my job where I was happy and I enjoyed Kip and I enjoyed the people I work with and I thought I was going to do something good. And Kip was like, hey, we know your grant is coming to an end. Do you want to do something?
Right.
um, but during this time, and I have to credit my husband a lot for this. He was like, think about what you really like doing during this time. Because there was also this period of time where I had to go to work every day and basically I had nothing to do.
Yeah, because we're not going to give you really anything of importance because you're not going to be here. You don't even go here.
Like, it was also like that month of June where you're getting ready for the next year and I had nothing to do.
Yeah, you were just there.
And so I would sit in my office and I would say, this is so nerdy. I'd write PD for fun. Right. And I'd be like, okay, if I'm thinking about what I think new teachers should know, and I'd create this whole scope and sequence, and I'd write PD for fun. If I think about what I think new coaches, and I'd write that for fun, and I would just crank it out and making PD.
Yeah.
Like, and so then I started sending it to principals, and I'm like, would you pay for this?
Mm-hmm.
Would you? Do you think this is something that people really need? And like, some people say yes, some people wouldn't answer my email at all. And so one principal, the principal who had hired me when I got hired and fired, she was like, I'll give you my entire Title I budget next year. I was like, wait a minute. Maybe I'm starting a business.
Yeah.
I have value. I really enjoy professional development. I enjoy coaching teachers. I enjoy like helping people to do this work. And so that's when I started my consulting business. It was started out KMG. And that just started from that experience. And I just started working with schools, and then other schools would say, hey, can you come help me? And then other schools would say, hey, I heard you coaching. Can you come help me? And it just began to build from that. So I did that for 5 years and was very happy doing that work, very satisfied doing that work. And one of my clients said, hey, the executive director at the time said, hey, I'm stepping down. Will you come with me to explain to my leaders that I'm stepping down? Because I had built great relationships with them. I had coached all of them. And so he's basically saying, like, come with me to kind of be a support.
Yeah, right.
And I go with him and we're there and he's explaining, like, I'm stepping down and he's the founder. This is like an emotional moment for them. And then they look at me and say, so are you our next ED? I was like, hell no.
It's a no for me.
That's not going to be a no.
Right.
See, I'm over here consulting. I really enjoy my business. I'm just here for support. Yeah. I will definitely help you find your next ED. And I remember thinking, like, that's so strange that they would ask me that. Like, I'm not an ED.
Right.
I'm not an executive director. I coach, I consult, I like my freedom, all of these things. But that was just kind of in the back of my mind. And so then the board at the time said, hey, will you support us in finding the next ED? Absolutely. I will help y'all find the next ED.
They were like, because we know it's you.
At time, I will help you find the next ED. And it came up like maybe 3 or 4 times. Like, are you the next executive director? Long story short, I prayed about that, meditated on that, talked to my family about that. And I was like, maybe I am. Why not? Like, and I remember being intimidated around, like, well, I don't have a lot of fundraising experience outside of being on my kids,
selling popcorn.
Well, and I was like, and I'm thinking about all the reasons
why not,
right? And again, I gotta give CJ a shout out there. He's like, but look at everything that you can bring to this organization. Like, why wouldn't you do this? And so that's my current role now. I serve as an executive director of a network of charter schools that I feel chose me. Even when I was like, what?
Yeah.
So I've been there. This is year 5 now. So
we could stop the podcast right now just based off of everything that you just told us. Yeah. So that to me is, I what I think is interesting is just like the vast variety of roles and experience that you have that honestly set you up to be a really good ED, because had you not, the teaching, obviously the traditional school you went to starting the residency program, even being in a space where you were hired and fired in the same day, right? Like consulting. Because one thing I love about consulting is you get to put your hand in so many different pots that you see like vastly what's happening in education around you.
Aerial view, like you're here looking around and you can see all these things.
So I would imagine then you take that into your ED role, right? And there's an impact there. So everything that you named has like a critical purpose, to me, of like how you then landed in this space.
Yeah, I actually have chills right now. It's divine, right?
Mhm.
It is definitely that scripture that says, "And in all things."
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
All of these things were preparing me for this moment that I didn't even realize.
Yep. That hired and fired though. I had forgotten about that.
I kept my letter.
Because that is wild.
That
But
is
that's such an interesting.
wild.
But I think that's also a really key component of like a very clear to me indication of God being like, yeah, nah, we're not getting comfortable here,
You
and
know,
this is not what
this.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where you think in that moment, like almost devastated. I was making $20,000 more in my new job where I got hired and fired. And at the time, I remember thinking, I've made it. Like, oh my God, they see my worth, my value.
And then he was like, no more. There's gonna be more.
And I remember thinking, like, can I possibly make more than this? Like, and now I'm laughing at that. Like, oh, you couldn't even see big for yourself. So God had to show you.
Yeah. So that's actually a very good transition into coaching, right? Because I think one of your superpowers is seeing bigger for other people. How have you developed that as a coach? Like, where do you think that's just like naturally who you are, or like? Because let me tell you, Kelly is very. If you want, Kelly she's gonna push you, coach. We were having a conversation the other day where you were like, why does everyone? Well, I was telling her essentially like everyone wants her approval, right? Like to me, Kelly's kind of like the bar for things. And she's always like, but I was just saying, like, why did that come across? And I'm like, because everybody looks at your opinion as like the gold standard. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that you do push. And so do you think that's part of your like natural personality, or do you think that's something you just have developed as a coach, that idea of like one being able to push people like past what they can see? Do you naturally see that? Because I always tell people you have to be able to see, the strengths in all people. And sometimes people tell me I don't see a strength, like they have nothing, right? And I'm like, no, there's something. So is that something you feel like is it natural about you, or you've had to develop, or like where does that ability to see the like strengths and best in others come from?
I think that's a really great question. I think it's a number of things. I do think there is like a natural innate gift where I can a lot of times see not only people's gifts, but their transferable skills. And so you may not see it in this space, but I can see like how this would work somewhere else. And it goes back from consulting, right? When you have this view, you can see what the full field looks like. So I think that I can see transferable skills in a way. I think about that even in some of the people on my team that I built, right? So my chief of staff, I saw her work as an assistant principal, but I could see the transferable skills. And little known fact, like she was part of my negotiation for the job. I said, if I take this job, I need a chief of staff and I wanted to be that person. Because I could see she had what I needed. I could see what those transferable skills were. I think the other piece of what you're saying is kind of tricky in that consulting space. When you're a consultant and you're a coach and you're on the outside, you can be a cheerleader who can push people really hard. But at the end of the day, you're not their boss.
Nope.
Right? Moving to this space, now I had to realize like my words are heavier. Whether I want them to be or not, they're heavier. And I remember one time having a conversation with one of my direct reports, and I was like, I used to coach you. I'm not saying anything different. And she says, but you're my boss now. And I may not feel that, but they feel that. And so, which is funny, even a funny word. They tease me and say, like, I would never say I'm their boss. Like, that's not even a word that I would use. But that's the space, and that people give you that, whether you want that or not. And so a lot of times I have to think about like, and even in that conversation we were having, the weight of my words feels different. Even if I say, there's in Michelle Obama's book, she says one day Barack Obama said, I think I might want some fish from somewhere. And they flew in this fish from like Alaska that same day. And she was like, when we lived in the White House, we had to pay for everything. So this is like a $5,000 fish. and he just said it.
Right.
And it happen.
Yeah.
And he's not understanding the weight of his words, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I have to be careful at work sometimes because I say, I think I might want, and then people are like,
yeah.
and sometimes I'm thinking out loud, and then they think that's a mandate. And so I have to.
Yeah, because you do ruminate like out loud a lot. Yeah.
So and so now I'm very careful and I say, hey y'all, I'm thinking out loud. So
Right.
I'm naming
It's not a directive.
This is not a directive. I'm thinking out loud, or being careful and inviting people into the space and feedback and saying, I'm really using you as a thought partner right now. So I need you to say this. Or sometimes I might say, I have made up my mind, but I want y'all to know, I want you to give me what may be a barrier here. And like those two things build a couple of things. One, trust, because some people will say like, oh, she's already made up her mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I will already make up my mind. And I'm going to say, I've already made up my mind. We're going to go in this direction, but I need you to tell me what the barriers are.
Yeah.
Or I'll say, I really don't know yet. I really need y'all to be a thought partner with me. And I think that builds trust and feedback because I take their feedback just as much as they take mine.
Mm. Okay. So my other wondering is around when you do have to give critical feedback.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I've been definitely on the receiving end
of
yes. I'm gonna tell you even on here the story of I had one day I was so excited in my little baby teaching life. I had like a really high, like mastery on like our state test. And I like went running to Kelly. Cause again, I just said, right, her approval for a lot of people is like number one. And I like went running up to her and I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, Kelly, Dr. Good. I have like, I don't know, like 98%, 96, I don't know. It was in the 90s% mastery. And she looked at me and was like, oh, that's great. What about the other 5%? And I remember I just was like, and turned around and went back to my little classroom.
And okay, lesson that I have heard, right? That lesson of stop and celebrate, right?
But I appreciated, and I think it's because obviously we had a relationship too, her being like excited for me, but also being like, but also
I know you can do this.
I know you can get 100, right? Like I know you can get all kids, right? And so like that, it was still an important push, but like that to me is an example of kind of just how high your bar is. So when you have to give critical feedback, I think that's something that a lot of coaches struggle with, especially new coaches. Mm-hmm. It's like, I don't know what it will do to our relationship with this person I'm trying to build if I give critical feedback or hard feedback. But the argument there is honestly, that's where the learning happens, is in the critical piece. So how do you approach those conversations and how do you coach others? Because your role now, you're having critical conversations, but a lot of times you're helping other people have critical conversations. So how do you navigate that?
Yeah. So for the most part, you're right. I am a manager of managers.
Yep.
So I'm working with them to do that. I think it's two things. One, building really strong relationships. I think people who work closely with me really know, like, I will go to bat for you. Mm-hmm. I will remove barriers for you. I will make connections for you. Like, and I think knowing that piece, people know like she genuinely cares. So it's hard to think that, I would like to think it's hard to think that, somebody's trying to harm you in any way when you have all this other totality of evidence for what that looks like. So I think the relationship piece is key. In spaces where I don't have a relationship, I seek like what's really positive in that space that I can kind of catch on to and say, hey, I've seen this piece of you.
Yeah.
And then from a string space perspective, how can we get more of that? When you do this, you have this level of, so it's also like the data piece. Even before I met you, I looked at your data, right?
Yeah.
So I knew something about you. And I think that's a good piece, like to dig into the data. But another thing that I try is, and I saw this in the classroom, I think it's pretty common, the whole THINK acronym.
Yeah.
And so I try to be very thoughtful about my feedback. One, because I know my words can be heavy, just by nature of like, if I tell a teacher something in an organization, you have to think about the layers. I am their boss's boss, right? So like that in their minds, that's where they go. I don't see it that way. Right. I see myself as, hey, I love teaching. I know teaching. I can help you with that. But that's what they see. So I have to like come back to what people see. So my first piece is is it true? What am I about to say? And I say true, that T around data, like what's in the data to say that thing. And if anybody's been coached by me, they know one of my pet peeves is when you give feedback that says, I like when you, right? Because that's your opinion. That's not true. That's not data. Like what's grounded in data? So if I can ground in data and say, hey, when I was in your classroom, I noticed 12 of 16 kids were on task when you did XYZ, right? That's the true piece. And then people are like leaning in, right? Because it doesn't feel like fluff. You now have data, like, and they also kind of feel like, oh,
she knows what she's talking about. Right.
So if I can lean into like the truth and the data piece, and then that H, like I really want to be helpful with what I'm saying. Is this something that's really going to move kids, or is this something that's just my preference? Like if it's just, some things are my preference. When I walk into a classroom, I like for things to be clean. Yeah, I like to absolutely. But I'm not going to be like, hey, I think you should clean.
That's not something worth coaching around.
That's not worth coaching on, right? And so I think that I'm thinking about, is it helpful? Is it important? Is this something that's really going to move kids? Is this really going to be impactful? And then, so that's the IN, that important. And then is it necessary? Like, is this something that's really necessary right now? Right? Because it could be something that could wait. It could be something that's low-hanging fruit. It could be something that, you don't, we call it pigeoning at work. Don't come and be the pigeon proof at the last minute on something that's not helpful right now.
Because nobody likes that.
Nobody likes that. Yeah. And then the last part, like, am I being kind in my delivery? And sometimes I have to be extra kind, again, because I'm going to just say the thing. Black woman in leadership, like you are held to a whole different, I cut my eye wrong if my face is not right, all of these things. And so I'm really trying to really be kind and be thoughtful. And then also in conversations, especially invite you into it. Hey, Erin, may I give you some feedback? And I do that whether it's on the positive end or not. Some people are really shocked when I say that. But I want to invite you into this space. I've never had anybody say no, but but it still gives a level of like, hey, I'm asking.
I'm not going to bombard you with this thing that you may not. Yeah,
exactly. I think those are just some of the strategies that over the years I've built, and I've made a lot of mistakes in giving feedback. I'm grateful that my team does give me feedback. There's actually a section in my one-on-one document where I give them feedback for the week on something that was a win and something that was an opportunity. And then I in turn say, hey, as your manager this week, what was a win for me? Something that I did well as your manager. And then what's a space that I can do something better, or a space that you think I may have missed up? And they may say, just last week, my team members was like, I think our meeting was too long and I don't know where you were going. And that's not really like you. So, yeah. And I was like, oh, well, that's really helpful because here is my intention. Can you tell me how I could have done that differently?
Yeah, that didn't land the way I thought that
didn't land the way I thought.
Yeah.
And I would have never known that, right?
But that goes to show how secure of a leader you are, though, because some leaders either would dismiss that or they would ask that, but it would feel disingenuous. And so then people sometimes don't want to give the feedback to their leader because it feels like, which I think is the same as like a teacher who may, if a coach is like, hey, give me some feedback, a teacher may feel apprehensive to do that because it's like, is that genuine? Is that not? Right. But it goes to show to me like the level of one, like modeling for yourself, that modeling for others that you're doing, but then the relationships you've built that allow for that them to feel comfortable to give you a genuine piece of feedback.
And I have to dig sometimes.
Yeah.
And even ask a different question, like, is there anything that you think I could have done differently this week? But then I also say, is there anything that you think I did well this week? Because I am a words of affirmations person. Like sometimes I need to know that I'm on the right track. Right. I need to know that I'm on the right track as well. And so I think it becomes this two-way thing. And then I think the other piece that really shows like that genuine relationship, I'll come back and say, hey, I heard you say, and that's why I'm doing this. And so I say that a lot to my team.
You do say that a lot.
To our entire organization, because I want you to know we're listening. And then a lot of times people, quite frankly, will complain about something and they're not seeing where the action took place.
Yeah, they don't understand the connection between I'm doing this thing in direct alignment with what you said.
Yes. Yeah. So I'll say, hey, I heard you say. And so in direct response to that,
this is what's happening.
This is what's happening. And so you have to keep making that connection for people. But that's also me responding to your feedback.
Yeah. Okay. So I have another question around coaching and from an ED perspective. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times coaches are the first thing in a budget to go, right? Or people don't always see the value of coaches, which I think obviously also is dependent upon a lot of factors as far as like, do you have a coaching framework, strong, like, do you have a vision for coaching in your district or in your network, and like, why does it exist? But I don't know, as an ED and I would say coach, like, do you still see the value of coaches in schools and buildings, and like as far as change agents for instruction?
I don't think there's a clear, clean answer to that. I think it's layered, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I've been in spaces and districts where there's no framework for coaching. Coaches were not trained. And so coaches were basically like resource people. I'll help you find a resource, I'll make copies. No, if I'm over a budget, I'm not spending money on that. And
Right.
like, they were very well paid research, like resource people. So I can see that, right? And even in my organization, when I first got to the organization, their assistant principals were coaches.
Mm-hmm.
And they had really heavy coaching loads, and we had a lot of them. So for a school of less than 400 kids, you had about 6 assistant principals. But you had a lot of teachers because you had 2 teachers for every grade in K-5. But I say all this to give you context of the coaches were coaching like 20 people at a time.
Which isn't going to be impactful.
That's not impactful. That's not research based. That's not supportive. Like, and so then, but teachers felt like they had a person, right? Because teachers do need a person.
Yep.
And I was big bad wolf when I came in and I cut this structure. And I cut the structure for a number of reasons. One, AP and coach, that's a really hard thing to do because you're evaluator and coach, and that's not a good mix. And
yeah,
that's a whole lot of stuff, right? So I was trying to untangle some
of the things. Yeah,
I was trying to untangle some of the things. And then with that, it was no real coaching structure. So I was like, let's take a step back from this and build a structure first and be very clear about what we're coaching on, who's coaching, making sure that they are prepared to be coaches. So I think, yes, coaches are needed, but coaches have to have support too, right?
Yep.
It's a really hard and frustrating space for them to be in if they aren't being developed, if they're basically being thrown in and being like the catch-all and, hey, we need a sub today, you're the coach.
Yep.
Hey, they need resources, you're the coach. And then, when you're the coach, you're also the therapist and the confidant and all of these things. So I want to make sure that coaches are really equipped. And I also want to make sure that they have manageable caseloads, like that it's in any role, that it is a well-defined role, is clear, you are supported, and you are set up for success.
Yeah.
And I feel like if you can't do those things, don't do it.
I would agree with that. Because then I think you taint the kind of the role personally.
Exactly. So then everybody's like, my coach is a joke, or coaching is a joke. Or
I like came across a post the other day, not so long ago, about coaches. And I went in the comments and I was like, my God, people were in there like, my coach don't do anything. It's like that. I was like, oh my God. Like, it was just so bad. And I remember I rarely comment on stuff, but I was there like, I'm really sorry that a lot of you have had this experience with a coach, because coaching, it made me a phenomenal teacher, period.
I also think about this in a lot of spaces, because of the poor way that our education system is set up, it's the only way to be seen or promoted.
That's true too. So it becomes this. So instead of I want to be a coach because I have a love for development of people and coaching and adults, it's my way out it's how I get out of the classroom. Or on my way to an AP or a principal. That's a good point. Yeah.
So when you have that type of mindset about it, and then the people who you left know that was your mindset.
Yeah,
that's true.
Because you have to like adults to coach, to be an instructional coach
too. And a lot of times when people go into coaching, you are a great teacher of children.
Yep. And adults are a whole nother ballgame.
And I'm always tickled when people come into this space and they say, but they're not doing what I asked them.
That was me. I was like, I'm confused. You mean to tell me nobody here does their jobs? What was I doing?
And they were like, that's why we promoted you.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, okay, right? But it is a whole different ballgame. That's so true. Okay, I have 2 other questions for you. So the one question I have, and maybe they link together, I don't know. What is different for you in coaching teachers and I don't mean this I'm going to say it this way, but I don't mean it in a way. Coaching teachers versus coaching leaders, right? So, or coaching coaches of like next line. Y'all know what I'm trying to say. What's that like for you? What's the difference for you?
It's a very different skill set. So kind of like I was just saying, moving out of the classroom, you were teaching kids and then you go into teaching adults, and some skills are transferable, but not all of them, right? I think one of the biggest things in coaching through layers, managing through layers is really hard. You have to have a lot of influence, and you have to I use the influencer model a lot, if you're not familiar with that. But the influencer model first looks at, is this a skill or a will, right? So that's the first thing when you're looking at coaching anybody. Is the problem skill or will? But then when you're looking at coaching through layers and managing through layers, you have to think through, now how do I get here, 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 and here? And I think the first thing is like being super clear on what the vision is. And a lot of times when people sit in leadership positions, you want to be so clear on the direction and where you're going and being right. And what I've learned is you're never going to be perfect or right, but you do need to be clear. Right? People will follow you if you are clear and if you're also being honest along the way. Hey, I don't know that this is going to work perfectly, but here's what we're driving towards and here's what we need to do. And I'm going to be super clear on the path to that. And I need you with me, right? I think it's a little bit easier when you're coaching, and maybe not easier, but it's a different scope, a different skill set when you are in the classroom and you can see directly that coaching moves. So I coached you today on this thing, and you're going to practice it tomorrow, and it's going to be it.
And I can come back and see if you did it.
See if you did it, right? But when I'm coaching, when I am coaching a chief of schools, to coach a principal, to coach the assistant principals, to like that's the whole, to coach teachers.
It's like a really bad game of telephone.
It is, right? Which is why you got to be super clear. And when you're, which means that you can't have a whole lot of things that you're trying to do, right? Because I can't remember all the things in the telephone. But I think that I'm getting a lot better at that. And I think in my organization, people will be very clear on what's important, right? And I think that's the part that you have to be super clear on when you're going through layers. Like, what's your thing?
Yep.
What's your thing? What's your non-negotiable? And then also like building an identity that's so strong. And you probably can, people will be like, Kelly's not gonna go for that. And not in
that is true.
Not in a bad way, but like, I know her vision so strong, and that's not in alignment.
That's not going. Yeah.
That's not going.
Yeah. That's good. I like that. Just like, it's like literally clarity. If nothing else, you have to be clear.
Be clear.
Even if I'm clearly wrong, we're going to be clear.
I'm going in this direction.
Yeah, we're clear.
And we're going to be super clear, because think about when people are most frustrated. It's when there's no clarity. I don't know what we're doing.
Yep.
But if you can be super clear on, I am unapologetic about us driving in this direction, and this is where we're going, then people can say, okay.
What would you say is the difference between a mentor and a coach? Because I ask that because I look at you as both, but I think that's kind of rare.
Well, I am dynamic, but
because I feel like
it's rare.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, it's also been murky and hard for me as a leader. And I'll say why. Because there are some times where I just need to be a hardcore manager. And I'm trying to coach and pull you and mentor you and all this stuff. And then I'm exhausted and I still didn't get the thing. And so I think, well, I want to answer that question, but I do think there are spaces, right? And I even have come to with my team now, and I say, hey, I'm going to coach mode right now. And then I say, all right, I've tried that. Now I need to go in your manager mode, right? There's things I need to document. There's some things I need to move forward with. Like, and then I think what I'll add to that is there are some spaces where I am in a mentor space where, like, sometimes I do simply just speak life into my team and speak life into the people that are around me. I think that's mentoring, right? You can do this. Let me tell you my story. Let me tell you how I overcame this. Let me tell you what was hard about that. I think that is important. And you talk a lot about storytelling. I think that's a part of mentorship of, here's what I've learned. also, here's where I want to put you in the right spaces with people. Like, I think that that's the gift and a blessing that I'm able to do for some people sometimes. So I think that's mentoring. But I think coaching is, hey, let's do this thing. Let's practice it. Let me give you feedback on that. And then there's also the manager's piece of, I need you to do this.
Yeah. It's hard. That's why I tell people all the time, leadership is hard because you just don't know sometimes which hat to put on in the beginning until you kind of really get fluid with like, because I could see spaces and times being in just like a one-on-one session where you all three of those things might show up,
Yeah.
right? Depending what's happening in the one-on-one. So like
Yeah.
that fluidity.
Example of that. I have a leader who is amazing at a lot of things, but just simply doesn't answer emails. And I was like, you know what? I have to manage you on this right now, right?
Right. We're no longer going to have a mentorship conversation.
This is ridiculous. You are, and I will say that you are amazing. This, and this, but you are losing the people because they don't trust that you're going to respond to them.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to have to manage you on this. And this is what that looks like, right? This is what that accountability looks like. And that's a different space.
You have so much knowledge. I feel blessed to be able to have you as a mentor / coach.
Most days, huh?
No, all days. Because I think it's interesting also because even like as a consultant in your space, I still look at you like my boss.
That's funny.
I do.
Is that good?
But I do I think it's just because I have such high regard for you. I'm like, if any client is going to be happy, it's going to be Dr. Gunn. Because if not, then we can just shut this whole business down.
But so, I also want to give our organization credit too. I think that we have embraced our consultants as team members.
Yes.
So maybe hopefully that's part of what you feel.
Yes. Because I really sometimes be like, I want to hang out. I'm like, no, I'm not really on the team. Okay.
You on the team.
You have, but I'm just saying
you got a jacket.
Yeah, but I'm just saying sometimes I have to be like, Erin, you do not work there. Okay, go away.
So. I think that's what's funny about when you saying that though. I think you having the outside lens. Like sometimes I do use you as a coach.
Yes,
because I'll say, what am I not seeing here? Because you can see this in a different way, right? Which I know a consultant can do, and I might say, what would you coach me on in this moment? Right. So see how those.
I see. It's my forever coach. Okay. So I like to end the podcast. This one I'm just gonna come up with off the top of my head of like just like something fun or lighthearted in education. So what was your worst subject in school, like growing up?
Math.
Oh, me too.
God. Even now,
me too.
8th grader is doing high school algebra. And I just I have to go get my husband because I am like, yeah, I don't even know what this is saying.
Yeah, math is 4th grade math is already taking me to another place.
I have a theory about this though.
What?
I have a theory around, I wonder if we went back and studied our elementary math experiences, what that would look like. I think I had K-5 teachers who were really strong and just leaned towards ELA and didn't make math come alive for me.
I remember learning some weird way of math, something called Nick's way. It was
Who's Nick?
I don't know, but I remember it was funny because a friend that I went to elementary school one time referenced it. And I was like, oh my God. But Nick's way tore me up. But it was some way we calculated something. I don't even remember, but I just remember it tore me down. And I remember my dad would just be like, all you gotta do. And I'd be like, oh, and that was that. And so after that,
I really wonder if it was something about how we were introduced to math as girls, how our teachers introduced us to math. I don't remember any manipulatives in math.
Serious this out. This was supposed to be fun. And now we're talking about our math trauma and manipulatives. And okay, wait, did you go to all girls school? Oh.
But I do wonder, like, even when I look at, I think we're doing a better job of it now. This is a whole different conversation. But you lean towards the things that you're good at and you feel comfortable with. So I wonder how good and comfortable my elementary math teachers were.
That's a definite like development. Yes, that's probably true.
See, I told you, even as a child, I was like,
I know. I hope you didn't tell your teachers. I have some feedback for you on how you could have. She would have been like, "Girl, sit down." That's funny.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show. It actually means the world to me that you came, because when my first episode, you were the first person to look at it before anybody besides Bree and whoever else on the team. You were the first person to look at the.
And I was just enjoying it, and you just wanted feedback, and I was like, "Oh, okay, wait a minute, let me put a different brand."
Yeah, because I was like, tell me if it sucks. If it sucks, I'm not putting it out. Thank you. So that was really special to me too. So thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
We're super excited that you were here and just all the knowledge and all the great things. If people want to like learn more about you and all that you do, because I know you don't consult anymore, but
I'll take it, but I'll take the right gig.
yeah, because you have the right. She's got all the knowledge. How do they learn more about you?
For real. So follow on Instagram at Dr. That's DR_KMG. And then Twitter, not Twitter anymore, X, right?
Mhm.
I kind of want to be rebellious and still call it Twitter. But on X, Kindezid is KINDEZIED. So Kindezid.
Oh, that's cute. I'm not on X Twitter, but that's cute.
A lot of educators are.
Too much happening on there.
It is a lot. But in the consulting world, I do think that I started out a lot with directly working with teachers and teacher development. And I think I want to shift that more to leadership development, executive leadership, and also just organizational health. So kmgteacherdevelopment.com, probably making some changes to that soon.
I love that. All right. Thank you guys for having us.
Thank you. That was fun, Erin. I'm so proud of you.
Yeah.